far away, and it's a welcome to
O nau lai ka me tale hua e halale hua no yanaka no e tau noi e ano i nei e ali a nei ho i o tahiti mai ahiti mai no ko ahiti puno me te aloha 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 aloha
Thank you so much for being here. And I'm glad we have to do things the right way. I was going to apologize for not being able to do it the right way. I'm just so pleased that we were able to put together this panel on such an important issue for the state of Hawaii today, but I think that it holds resonance for so many of the things that all of us care about. And these are three scholars who've been thinking very hard about this issue. And I'm just so honored that they're able to share their knowledge with you. So Tim Freeman is going to be speaking first.
Can we cut the lights, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Aloha. All right. So, the conflict over the proposed 30-meter telescope on the summit of Mauna Kea has divided the community in Hawaii, and especially on the Big Island, polarizing friends and sometimes even family members on opposing sides of the dispute. On the one hand, it is easy to understand this polarizing effect, as the clash has been described as, on the one hand, as one that involves two positive sets of values: the urge to preserve and protect our natural and cultural resources, and the urge to understand and investigate the nature of the universe. Yet on the other hand, the conflict is not really very well understood. It is seen by many as simply a conflict between science and religion, the pursuit of knowledge versus superstition. The Hawaiian sense of the sacredness of the place was characterized in an article in the New York Times as equivalent to religious fundamentalism and creationist rejection of evolution. An astronomer in 2011 described it as, quote, an argument about returning to the Stone Age versus understanding our universe, unquote. A distinction between space and place. I should note that I gave an earlier version of this paper in Honolulu at the East-West Philosophy Conference, and the topic there was place, so some of this comes from that. A distinction between space and place, in which place is something that emerges over time, incorporating the experiences and aspirations of a people, and spaces are openings for different kinds of places, is perhaps helpful in thinking about this conflict. Using this distinction, it is easy to see that the summit of Mauna Kea is a space that is really two very different places. On the one hand, due to its high elevation and pristine viewing conditions, the summit of Mauna Kea simply is one of the premier places for astronomy on the planet. For many Hawaiians, however, the summit of Mauna Kea is a sacred place. The highest peak in the Hawaiian Islands, the abode of the gods, such as Poliahu, the goddess of the snow, it is perhaps the most sacred place, not only in Hawaii, but in all of Polynesia. There are many issues to consider in thinking about this conflict and trying to understand why, for many Hawaiians, these two places are simply incompatible. Perhaps the most difficult issue is that summit has become, for many Hawaiians, a place for resistance to the continuing legacy of colonialism in Hawaii. Many scientists, however, and others who support the TMT think that the knowledge to be gained by the telescope is so important for all humankind that the construction of the telescope should not be encumbered by such unfortunate political circumstances. For philosophers schooled in the suspicion raised by Nietzsche's questions concerning the origin of knowledge, the very idea of pure value-free knowledge has become questionable. For these philosophers, all human knowledge must be viewed through political, cultural, and ideological context. The argument that the advancement of scientific knowledge justifies overriding Hawaiian cultural concerns is itself a continuation of the narrative of colonialism and imperialism exposed by Edward Said first in his landmark text Orientalism, and developed further in Culture and Imperialism and other texts. The conflict over the summit of Mauna Kea is really about two conflicting narratives, two different stories that frame two distinct places. As Said puts it in Culture and Imperialism, what is decisive is narrative. Quoting, "The main battle in imperialism is over land, of course, but when it came to who owned the land, who had the right to settle and work on it, who kept it going, who won it back, who now plans its future, these issues were reflected, contested, and even for a time decided in narrative." I am borrowing the title of my presentation from my book, For Whom Are the Stars, which chronicles the events of the 1893 overthrow of Queen Loyola-Marymount and the Kingdom of Hawaii. In explaining her title, the author gets to the crucial issue at stake. Quoting again, "As for the title, For Whom Are the Stars, is a line from the ancient Hawaiian mele or chant, a song for Ku'ali'i. It voices the persistent and often painful question as to who shall control the destiny of a nation, a king, a queen, the people of a certain race, or all those who make that place their home." Unquote. I shall return later to the story of this chant from which this title is taken. For now it is necessary to give some sense of these two competing narratives and the distinct places that conflict on the summit of Mauna Kea. Due to its high elevation and location in the middle of the Pacific, the summit of Mauna Kea is a unique and extraordinary location for astronomy. Since the first telescopes were built on the mountain in the late 1960s, the Mauna Kea observatories have become one of the most important land-based astronomy sites in the world. From discoveries about our neighboring planets to revelations about the most distant stars, the telescopes have led to many significant advances in astronomy. The proposed 30-meter telescope is one of three planned next-generation extremely large telescopes, and the TMT would not only have the highest elevation of the three and the pristine viewing conditions at Mauna Kea, it would be the only one scanning the northern skies. As described in the New York Times, the TMT would, quote, "be the most powerful telescope yet built on the best stargazing site on the planet," unquote. The TMT promises astounding discoveries, higher resolution images of distant galaxies, stars and planets, and observations far deeper into space and further back in time than ever before. The TMT may enable a look back toward the beginning of it all, gathering the most distant light from the first light after the Big Bang and the beginning of the universe and the beginning of time. The TMT would allow astronomers to get closer than ever before to the most lofty goal of astronomy, to know our place in the universe. Perhaps best summarized in the oft-quoted lines from T.S. Eliot, "We shall not cease from exploration until the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." For Hawaiians, Mauna Kea is also about origins and also about the stars. Many of the stories about Mauna Kea, from oral histories and historical accounts, are collected in a text bearing the title Mauna Kea, Kapiko Kalana o Ka'aina, Mauna Kea, the famous summit of the land. The most well-known story is the Kumalipo, a genealogical chant linking the royal family to not only the gods but the stars in the heavens, telling of the Hawaiian practices of navigation, knowledge of the stars and the world around them. In her introduction to the text, Queen Loyola-Marymount wrote, "The ancient Hawaiians were astronomers, and the terms used appertain to the heavens, the stars, terrestrial science, and the gods." In the Kumalipo, Mauna Kea is understood as the offspring, the firstborn of the coupling of the Sky Father and Earth Mother. What is most interesting in this origin story is that human beings are born from the same creative forces that gave birth to the islands. In this perspective, human beings are in a kinship relationship with the environment. There is a familiar Hawaiian proverb that suggests the, quote, intimate relationship to place, unquote, for Hawaiians. "Hanau ka aina, hanau ke ali'i, hanau ke kanaka." Born was the land, born were the chiefs, born were the common people. This proverb illustrates the hierarchy of the Hawaiian world order, with the aina as the most important, followed by the ali'i, and then the people. In this hierarchy, a reciprocal relationship is implied, quoting this text again, where each one needs the other in order to flourish. In an important text from a native daughter, Colonialism and Sovereignty in Hawaii, Hananike Trask elaborates on, quote, the genius of the mutually beneficial political system of pre-Hawaii Hawaii. If kinship formed the economic base of Hawaiian society, quoting her again still, it also established the complex network of ali'i, the chiefs, who competed in terms of rank, established by Mauna, or spiritual power, derived from chiefly genealogies or from conquest and war, an ability to create order and prosperity on the land, unquote. She points out that the Hawaiian people were not bound to the land or the rulers like in the European feudal system, but were free to choose where and under which ali'i they were to live. The result, quoting her again, was an incentive for society's leaders to provide for all their constituents' well-being and contentment. To fail to do so meant the loss of status and thus of mama for the ali'i. I'm supposed to be in here. It must also be emphasized that this reciprocal relationship not only included the relationship between the people and the ali'i, but also the relationship between human beings and the aina. Here it is worth mentioning that the word aina, usually translated as land, might perhaps best be understood in the sense put forward in the land ethic, where Aldo Leopold first put it, quoting Leopold, "Land then is not merely soil, it is a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soils, plants, and animals." Unquote. This ethic changes the relationship between human beings and the rest of the natural world, quoting, "from conqueror of the land community to plain member and citizen of it." Leopold proposed the land ethic as a further evolution of morality, but perhaps there was already something very much like it when he was, very much like what he was proposing in the Hawaiian kapu system, in which, as Trask explains again, nature was not objectified, but personified, resulting in an extraordinary respect when compared to Western ideas of nature, for the life of the sea, the heavens, and the earth. Returning now to the collection of stories about Mauna Kea in the text Mauna Kea Kau Piko Kalana o Ka'aina, it is worth noting that the summit of Mauna Kea is a piko. This is a most interesting word. In a classic source book of Hawaiian cultural practices and concepts and beliefs, it is explained that the word piko can refer to a summit or a peak, but there is also the notion of the triple piko of a person, the three areas of the body that connect the individual with the past, present, and future. Thus, the crown of the head connects one with the past, one's ancestors. The umbilical cord connects one through the mother symbolically to all blood kin in the present, and the genitals connects one to even those yet unborn. There is yet another sense of a piko in the sense of a center, or a place to be centered, the center in the sense of a gathering place, such as a community center. There is also an expression, moka piko, the cord is cut, that was used symbolically to convey, quote, a tragic disruption of loving relationship, unquote. This expression would be used then when a serious offense had been done that led to a break in a family relationship. Thus, for example, as explained in this text, moka piko resulted when family members took opposite sides in a religious, social, perhaps even political issue, unquote. Thus, moka piko was a terrible thing that would require some serious restitution in order to retie the cord. Thus, the summit of Mauna Kea is a piko, perhaps not just in the literal sense of being the summit of the mountain, but also perhaps in the multiple ways that the word piko suggests. Perhaps Mauna Kea might be thought of as a piko in the sense of the triple piko of a person. Obviously, since Mauna Kea was the firstborn, from which the whole of the aina, and then the ali'i, and then the people descended, it is like the crown piko of a person connecting the Hawaiian people through their genealogy to their origins. Perhaps Mauna Kea is also like the umbilical piko. Perhaps Mauna Kea is also like the umbilical piko, connecting the people in the present, especially as it has become a gathering place, a connecting point, something like a community center, in becoming a place for resistance against the legacy of colonialism, that for many Hawaiians is not at all something in the past, but rather something that very much still frames the present. Finally, perhaps Mauna Kea is also like the genital piko in connecting the Hawaiian people with their future. For many Hawaiians in the sovereignty movement, what is at stake is nothing less than their continued existence as a distinctly Hawaiian people. To see just how much the dispute over Mauna Kea is entangled in the legacy of colonialism, one has to appreciate how much the history of astronomy in Hawaii is entwined in the history of colonialism. It was, after all, a scientific mission that led to Captain Cook's first voyage to the Pacific. The Royal Society had sent Cook to Tahiti in 1769 to observe the transit of Venus as a means of establishing longitude as well as the astronomical unit, and thus more accurately determine the dimensions of the solar system. The mission was not completely successful, but it did help to establish longitude, however, and thus when Cook came to the Hawaiian Islands on his third voyage in 1778, he carried with him astronomers from the Royal Society, and what they accomplished literally put Hawaii on the map by pinpointing its latitude and longitude. Obviously, the mapping of the globe and the placement of Hawaii on the map would greatly aid navigation and thus the development of colonialism. The next transit of Venus in 1874, when Kalakaua was king, led to an awkward encounter between the British astronomers and Hawaiians. Kalakaua was initially very enthusiastic and warmly received the visitors. The king was so excited about the telescopes that he came on several occasions, bringing with him an entourage of noble women to view the marvels of the night sky. The astronomer in charge of the mission eventually lost patience with the, quote, intolerable nuisance, unquote. In another visit, a couple of weeks before the transit, he harshly ushered the king and his guests out, apparently even calling them savages. The king did not even stay for the transit, as he had to travel to Washington, D.C. to negotiate the contentious Reciprocity Treaty in 1875. And when the transit day came, armed Marines were stationed outside the observatory compound to keep the curious Hawaiians away. It is worth briefly recounting a few key points about the events that led to the overthrow of the kingdom in 1893. First of all, it is important to understand the transformation of Hawaiian society, especially in regards to land, which came after the arrival of the Haoles. In pre-contact Hawaii, there was no private property and thus no basis, as Trask explains, quoting, for economic exploitation in pre-Haole Hawaii. Unquote. As she goes on to explain, it was gunboat diplomacy that forced the Hawaiian chiefs into accepting the Mahele of 1848-1850 that introduced private land ownership, and quoting again, by 1888, 3/4 of all arable land was controlled by Haole. Jonathan Osorio examines the Mahele in depth in his book, Dismembering Lahui, and in reading his account, it becomes clear just how devastating the introduction of private property was to Hawaiian society. Kalakaua was forced to sign another reciprocity treaty in 1887, in which the Pearl River Lagoon was ceded to the United States in exchange for duty-free sugar. The treaty also necessitated a new constitution for Hawaii, often referred to as the Bayonet Constitution, that severely undercut the power of a monarch by making the ministry responsible to the legislature, which was of course dominated by Haole property owners rather than the king. Thus, when Loyola-Marymount came to the throne after her brother's death in 1891, one of her prime objectives was to reverse the Bayonet Constitution. It is really easy to understand what happened. The merchants and property owners who controlled the legislature saw a monarch trying to grab power, and they saw themselves as a new American revolutionary. 3 days later, American Marines would be brought ashore in a show of force, and at dusk on January 17, 1893, the Queen surrendered the sovereignty of Hawaii. Initially, the deposed Queen had hopes the injustice would be recognized and the sovereignty of her nation restored, and she appealed both to the American President and the British Queen for help in reversing the injustice that had been done to her and her people. There was a note about this that apparently, in that book, For Whom Are the Stars, the author notes that Loyola-Marymount didn't quite understand that Victoria had already relinquished that power and reigned but did not rule. And she suggested that if Loyola-Marymount had accepted such a rule, maybe the overthrow would have never happened. But of course, for Loyola-Marymount, the fate of her people was at stake, and so she was impelled on the path she took. As far as President Garfield, he sent a commissioner, James Blount, to investigate what happened. And the Blount report concluded with a serious indictment of the overthrow. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to the Hawaiians who were confident that Garfield would surely order the restoration of Hawaiian sovereignty, the president was stricken by cancer and never responded to the Blount report. When McKinley became president, any chance for restoration of the monarchy evaporated. After the Spanish-American War, the manifest destiny that had justified the slaughter of indigenous peoples and the expansion of the United States across the continent swept across the Pacific, leading to the annexation of Hawaii in 1898. 6 decades later, at a time when the great European powers were relinquishing their colonial holdings and many former colonies gained independence, the former colony of Hawaii was finally fully absorbed into the United States. Of course, there is no denying the sense of racial and cultural superiority that underlied the notion of manifest destiny that propelled American expansionism and imperialism. We understand as well how this sense of superiority arose out of the confidence of the European Enlightenment, the confidence in the virtues of democracy and capitalism, and the conviction that modern science was leading humanity forward beyond the mere superstitions of more primitive people. There is no denying the fact that it was the overthrow of the Queen that determined the fate of the summit of Mauna Kea. The land was part of the Crown lands, almost 2 million acres of land that had been reserved at the time of the Mahele to be set aside for the Hawaiian people under the control of the Crown. The summit of Mauna Kea was under the control of Liliuokalani at the time she was overthrown that fateful day in January of 1893. I don't know if it makes sense to say this, since the phrase apparently originated in Hawaiian culture to refer to a break in a familial relationship. But if we consider our ancestral ties to all human beings, perhaps we could say that what happened in the overthrow was mokapiko. The cord has been cut. It seems we must begin by acknowledging that this is what happened, and that this cut deeply wounded Hawaiian people, especially in considering the very senses in which the summit of Mauna Kea might be considered a piko. The essential question is perhaps to ask, how could it be possible to build the TNT without further mokapiko? How is restitution possible? How can the cord ever be really mended and this wound healed? In thinking about this dispute, it becomes obvious how deeply entrenched colonial attitudes of thinking remain in the arguments for the telescopes. One often hears the argument that astronomy and Hawaiian culture should be able to coexist on the mountain. Ancient Hawaiians were astronomers, using the stars to navigate their way across the Pacific, and that Hawaiians today should thus welcome the astronomy that takes place on the summit. Why can't the mission of the telescope be part of the sacredness of the mountain? Surely the mountain is large enough to accommodate both telescopes and sacred sites for Hawaiians. Why can't Hawaiians still practice their culture on the mountain and allow for the telescopes? The Iniloa Astronomy Center on the campus of Hilo is an expression of the hope that astronomy and Hawaiian culture can coexist, a demonstration of respect for Hawaiian culture and an exposition of the importance of the mission of astronomy. The proposal for the TMT acknowledges that there will be some cultural impacts, but offers some mitigation for these impacts in the form of a benefits package, including a generous $1 million per year STEM education program for Hawaiian youth. In addition, proponents have surely emphasized the existence of the TNT on Mauna Kea will be an economic boon for the local economy, while its rejection will certainly set that economy back for years to come. First of all, in regards to this proposal for a STEM education program for Hawaiian youth, perhaps it might be considered whether this is at least to some extent a self-serving offer. Oh, we're sorry for the overthrow of your nation and for the cultural impacts that the telescopes might have, but here's a generous offer to educate some of your children to think more like us. Perhaps if more Hawaiians were educated in science, technology, engineering, and math, they would understand how right we are, that the way forward for all of us lies in the development of science and technology. Perhaps I am raising here an important question about the limitation of a merely STEM education. Maybe scientists should have a broader education. Maybe this whole thing wouldn't have happened if they had. At the very least, I don't see how such an offer comes close to the kind of restitution that could possibly reconnect the pika that was cut and heal the wound that Hawaiians have suffered. Perhaps if it were an offer to fund not just STEM programs, but Hawaiian studies as well, it might be more of a really generous offer. There is no doubt that Hawaiians continue to suffer the effects of colonialism. Perhaps there should be a better offer to assist the Hawaiian community than merely the trickle-down effect from telescope development. Such efforts, however, would still not address the fundamental issue of whether mitigation efforts could ever be adequate in addressing the cultural impacts of the telescopes on Mauna Kea. Here we come to the issue which raises the most interesting philosophical questions, and that is, just what is it about the existence of the telescopes that amounts to a desecration of the sacred summit? Sometimes one even hears argument that contests the protectors' claims about the sacredness of the summit. Some concede that one wouldn't put a scientific lab in a cathedral or a temple, but then they argue that there really isn't much historical or archaeological evidence that Hawaiians ever really used the summit of Mauna Kea as a temple. On the one hand, this argument repeats a colonialist argument dismissing as more primitive those cultures that did not have a well-developed tradition of written literature. There is significant archaeological evidence, however, of a ring of small shrines consisting of one or more upright stones encircling the summit. There is no evidence of a temple, a heiau, on the summit, but the obvious reason, acknowledged even by archaeologists, is that the pico was kapu. It was a place reserved for the gods, and only on extraordinary occasions, and as I understand it, would an alii make the ascent. There is an interesting story of Queen Emma's journey to the summit in 1882, and apparently it is in this account that the phrase kapiko kalana or ka'aina was first recorded. It also might be worth mentioning that on that arduous ascent to the summit, she and her party stayed at an old stone house, Hale Pohaku, which I'm guessing must have been right near here somewhere. Another issue concerns questions about technology, such as were raised by Heidegger's reflections on the problem of technology. For Heidegger, the problem with modern technology results from reducing all of nature, and even humans, to a mere resource in human use. One can certainly, oops, sorry, I forgot something here. Oh yeah, that was the Queen Emma. Another issue concerns, one can certainly imagine a lot worse uses of Mauna Kea than using it as a resource for astronomy. Though there is an alliance between the protectors of Mauna Kea and the protectors at Standing Rock, the construction of the oil pipeline across the Dakota seems perhaps worse than telescopes on Mauna Kea, and surely the use of Yucca Mountain, a sacred place for the Shoshone people, as a repository for nuclear waste is much worse. Nevertheless, even though Hawaiians were astronomers using the stars to navigate, they didn't build massive telescopes that would dramatically change the landscape and have such a lasting impact upon the land. Obviously, the common element in all three cases concerns how the land was appropriated and taken out of the control of the indigenous peoples. In the end, the case for building the TMT rests upon the importance of the mission of the telescopes. And for the proponents, this justifies the natural or cultural impacts that cannot be avoided. We are reminded that the Mauna Kea observatories have led to the development of innovative technologies that have contributed to, quote, making the world a better place, and to also, quote, amazing discoveries that have advanced civilization. That's from one of the observatory sites. In pushing our vision deeper into space and further back in time than ever before, the TMT would be another great leap for humankind. Its development will lead to further technological innovation, and it serves everyone in seeking to better understand our place, the place of all humankind in the universe. In coming to a conclusion, I would like to now return to the ancient Hawaiian chant, a song for Ku'ali'i, from which the title of this presentation is taken. There are apparently a number of versions of this chant, and I found a translation of one version in the Journal of Polynesian Society, get this, in the year 1893. Ku was an ali'i living on Oahu a couple of generations before the arrival of Cook. The translators explain that the chant was spoken to Ku before a great battle. It begins by reciting his genealogy, telling of his exploits in war. In asking a series of questions such as, for whom is the rain, and for whom is the sea, and even for whom are the stars, the chant asserts that everything belongs to Ku, the land, the sea, the rain, and even the sun and the stars. The chant goes on at great length explaining who Ku is by contrasting him with what he is not. He is not like the ohia tree with its lehua flowers, not like the waving leaf alapa, not like the sweet-smelling pulua tree, not like the mamaki, not like the naya, the dolphins in the sea. At the end, the chant finally reveals who he is. And get this, it says, Ku is a haole from Kahiki. Yes, it was rather surprising to read that, but let me assure you that even though Kahiki can mean a foreign country, the chant is not saying he is a white man from America. The translators explained in their introduction that the word haole meant something like supernatural being. I'd like to find out more about this, what it meant, but I get the gist of it. The chant is lifting Ku up above the ranks of ordinary men. It finally ends by declaring him even to be a god, the peer of Lono, Kane, and Kanaloa. The chant is thus extolling his status as an ali'i, and thus what we find here is a narrative that displays the kapu system in which all of the aina, and even the sun and the stars, belong to the ali'i. Most contemporary Haoles will dismiss the Hawaiian worldview as inferior to the modern worldview that is the product of the Enlightenment. The challenge in dealing with the lingering problems of colonialism, however, requires recognizing the ways in which the development of the Enlightenment, with its celebration of individualism and private property, freedom and democracy, science and technology, was always entangled with colonialism. Perhaps in moving forward, we have to proceed carefully in finding a way to defend freedom without being blind to economic oppression, democracy without overlooking when it is used to justify imperialism, and scientific inquiry without turning away when it may conflict with the demands of justice. It is perhaps ironic that the latest scientific evidence warning of the danger posed by the problem of climate change suggests perhaps that modern Western civilization is not as advanced in some ways as early indigenous cultures that emphasized a kinship relationship between humans and the natural world. There is no question that the development of our modern industrial civilization has reached a point of crisis. In an article in the Smithsonian titled "The Heart of the Hawaiian People's Arguments Against the Telescope on Mauna Kea," Doug Herman, a geographer and specialist in cultural knowledge of Hawaii and the Pacific Islands, draws attention to a renewed interest in indigenous people's worldviews as a result of this global crisis. Herman emphasizes that in the dispute about the summit of Mauna Kea, what is really at stake, however, is a conflict between two ways of knowing and being in the world. And what he suggests is that perhaps there is something valuable to be learned in understanding the heart of the Hawaiian people's arguments against the telescope. In another article, Herman writes about the current voyage of the Hokulea, the famous replica of an ancient Polynesian voyaging canoe. The title for its current worldwide voyage is Malama Honua, to take care of the earth. Herman quotes the famed navigator Manuel Thompson, who succinctly summed up the problem with our modern civilization. The sail plan we're on is not sustainable. Herman emphasized that it may be difficult to make the transition to a sustainable civilization, but it might be possible, he suggests, if we realize that we are all in the same boat. In closing, I would like to call attention to a shocking conclusion that the latest climate scientists may be suggesting, and that is, yes, we might indeed all be in the same boat, but unfortunately, it is not the Hokulea, but the Titanic. One could go on at great length, I think, exploring how perfect the Titanic may be as a metaphor for our modern civilization. In any case, many scientists are warning that the problem of climate change is much, much worse than most people realize. Some scientists think that we are very close to, or maybe even already past, the tipping point when climate change will be irreversible no matter what we do. It seems more and more obvious that unless we quickly develop a sustainable sail plan, that we are headed toward extinction. Some say within the next 20, 30 years. I cannot definitively answer the question of whether the TMT could ever be consistent with such a sail plan, but it would surely be tragically ironic, and perhaps a sad final epitaph for humankind, if the telescope enabled us to discover something about the origin of the universe and helped us understand our place in the universe, just as we were about to go extinct because we never figured out our place on Earth. One of my favorite images that my dear friend and neighbor that lives next door to me took of Mauna Kea in February of 2002, after an amazing storm that we had, and the next day the skies cleared and the snow level was down to 8,000 feet. That's the view across from Freeman Park near where you're staying.
Can you leave it up?
Yeah, sure.